Today, I want to talk about a massive shift that's happened inside the coffee industry. I want to talk about coffee equipment, but in a slightly nerdy, more history-focused kind of way, because the state of things now is fascinating and way, way different than the way it was. And this is a sort of shift in power of who's kind of leading the charge in coffee. And it's not, as it once was, the coffee industry itself. Now, I've been in coffee for maybe 20 years, a little bit longer, which feels like a long time. It's probably not, but I want to go back a little bit earlier than that still. You see, in the 1990s, maybe early 2000s, before social media, before that there were coffee forums. Before coffee forums, there was Usenet groups. Alt.coffee was the place to go online to talk to fellow coffee nerds. And this is where our story starts. Now, it might not come as much of a surprise to find out that coffee machines for the home back then weren't that good. And this group online at alt.coffee were frustrated by that, and they had come to a solution. They wanted to use what are called PID controllers. If you don't know what a PID controller is, don't worry too much. It's a little box that does maths, and it will kind of create a feedback loop and allow a machine, if it's controlling the temperature, to stay within a narrower band of temperature. Alongside this group of home enthusiasts were people like David Schomer, owner of the time of Cafe Vivace, I think he still is the owner, and someone who was hugely influential in the early days of specialty coffee in the US. Combined, there was a real interest in brew temperature stability, and the way that machines controlled it in the past was kind of all over the place. It wasn't that bad, but it wasn't super accurate, and they felt very strongly that it needed to be much more stable, and that would yield better tasting espresso.
In my opinion, when espresso machine engineers can build us a machine that will hold the brewing water temperature stable to 1/10 of a degree Fahrenheit for each and every espresso that we make, humanity's 5-century quest to capture all of the aromas of roasted coffee in a cup will be over. So what we have learned in our 9th year of research at Espresso Vivace is just how sensitive espresso coffee is to any variation in the brewing water temperature.
These little boxes were relatively cheap to buy and not completely terrifying to install, for the layman. There were instructions online, and they became kind of surprisingly popular, to the point that the commercial espresso machine manufacturers started to pay attention. They'd been kind of caught flat-footed on this one. Everyone was pointing out that their machines weren't actually all that temperature stable, and they needed to be better. That was the route, that was the path to sweeter espresso, apparently. David Schomer talked at length about how flatline temperature profiles produced these kind of caramel bombs of espresso. That's not necessarily what I experienced when I drank a coffee in his cafe, but I loved how opinionated he was and how his espresso was most definitely like its own thing. But everyone bought into this idea in a really big way. So I arrived into the coffee scene around the time when commercial machine manufacturers were starting to freak out about this. And while they were sort of caught flat-footed in some ways, they also really liked this as a discrete problem to solve, right? Like, make a machine produce water at exactly the same temperature during the whole brew. That's a neat engineering challenge. They felt they could get their teeth into it and they could deliver that. And so a lot of espresso machine sort of innovation in that period was all about these flatline temperature profiles. Now, I was a part of this as much as anyone else was, right? Like, I was involved in sort of machines in a sort of design consultancy perspective where temperature profiles were really important. I got involved in testing the machines for the World Barista Championship to certify them as being suitable to kind of bid to sponsor that whole thing. And we had these devices. Let me show you one. Like this. This is a little portafilter. It's got a pressure gauge here. It's got a little puck inside it to replicate the sort of thermal mass of ground coffee, a little flow restrictor so it mimics the flow of water through a puck, and a little temperature probe here, a little T-type temperature probe. And we would use these to check that machines were producing this flatline temperature profile. And I kind of feel like it turned out to be a wild goose chase, a red herring in the world of coffee, right? Like, fixing that, I don't think made espresso notably better, because if I'm honest, of the bad espressos that I've drunk in my life, which are a decent number, I can't think of many that were bad because the brew temperature was not exact to 0.2 of a degree Celsius, right? Like, I've met baristas back in the day who really strongly felt that bumping the brew temperature up 0.2, 0.4 degrees Celsius sweetened up their espresso nicely. That may have been what they experienced, but this is also a time before like precision baskets were a thing, before we really knew much about like refractometers or extraction yields, or even like the basics of channeling. So, the shot may have been better, but I'm not sure the temperature was why. But anyway, for a little while, the whole coffee industry was obsessed with brew temperature. Now, despite the kind of potential flaws of commercial equipment we just talked about, actually for home baristas, commercial equipment was the dream, right? Like domestic equipment was considered so-so, but if you could get commercial equipment, well, that was the holy grail of espresso making at home. Now, I spent a lot of time on forums like Coffee Geek or Too Much Coffee or Home Barista, and actually you'd find tons of people who'd gone out and bought secondhand, often like 2-group commercial machines and kind of wedged them into their kitchens. I've seen just way more pictures of that than I ever thought I would. And back then, yeah, obsession with kit and upgrade-itis was kind of as bad as it is today, but just kind of different. But people thought that this was the pinnacle of home espresso making. When it came to, say, grinders, right? There weren't a ton of choices. Back then, there was like the Rancilio Rocky or like the Gaggia, I think MDF maybe. People wanted the Mazza Mini, or the Mazza Mini as it should be. For some reason, Mazza, Italian manufacturer of grinders, quite popular. So many people call them Mazza that at this point I've heard other Italians in the coffee industry call that company Mazza, even though it should be Mazza, unless we're all going to go and get a slice of pizza. Anyway, I digress. The Mazza Mini was considered by most cafes good enough for decaf, right? That was kind of where it sat. It was this small little grinder, not great, but for a home barista, this was, if you had a Mazza Mini at home, I'm saying it now, if you had a Mazza Mini at home, you were winning domestic coffee. Like this was the dream. And so just to summarize the time, commercial equipment is evolving, and ultimately it's evolving and leading the way forward. Most of the interesting technology in coffee is coming from the big commercial manufacturers. If you look at things like pressure profiling on stuff with pre-infusion, there were companies like Slayer or La Marzocco doing that kind of stuff. And then you had things like gravimetric technology where you could control the shot by the weight of the liquid in the cup. That came on a little bit later on. But ultimately, up until this point, commercial equipment is right at the cutting edge in the world of coffee. At some point, that stopped being true. At some point, there was a massive shift. And I'll tell you more about it after this short ad from this video's sponsor, which is Surfshark. Surfshark is a fast, easy to use and easy to install VPN service that will add a layer of privacy to your activity online. I've been using Surfshark for years now, and so I'm no longer surprised at how often it is incredibly useful. More and more of the web feels like it's geo-restricted. It might be online news sites, it might be content being geo-fenced on streaming services. Even YouTube can stop me watching a video if it thinks I'm in the wrong country. Using a VPN allows you to bypass this and access what you want to access online. In addition, you'll often find that some companies will geofence prices, and so depending on where you appear in the world, you'll be shown a different price for the same thing. This is a great way around that. Surfshark offers some other products too. I'm a big fan of Surfshark Alert. If your data is leaked, your passwords, your logins, in an online hack, you will be alerted, and so you can get ahead of that. Keep up to date, keep yourself secure. If you want to give it a try, go to surfshark.com/James Hoffmann for 4 extra months of Surfshark, and there is of course a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not happy. Thank you so much to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Just for a second, imagine that you are a commercial espresso machine manufacturer and you're thinking about your customer base. It's probably coffee shop owners. Now, if you think about what they want, it's not to produce a singular, incredible coffee experience. It's not to make the best espresso possible once. They need to make 500 to 1,000 drinks a day very consistently. Their goal is not necessarily the best possible, but kind of to make sure that no disappointing drinks are produced. And so the brief for the machine when they build it is a lot more about consistency, reliability, speed. These are things that are way, way more important. And if you look at how they solved them, you ended up with these very, very heavy coffee machines, big thermal masses in the group heads to keep the temperature nice and stable across this really high volume usage. Generally speaking, if you look at a coffee machine, a commercial one, spending more money money doesn't make you more delicious espresso. It doesn't make better espresso, so to speak. It will just make the coffee that it makes much more reliably. You're paying for that consistency and often a bit more control around that consistency. When it came to people at home, well, commercial manufacturers thought they'd be pretty happy if they could get an experience close to cafe quality, right? Cafe quality was still considered the highest quality, and so if they could replicate that or get close to it, they would be pretty happy. And that was, the space that kind of domestic machines filled. And then in the last 5 or 10 years, that really started to change. You see, enough people cared about espresso at home, enough people wanted something incredible in their own homes, that there was this new market that justified potentially an R&D spend because there might be a big enough market to buy a product that was expensive to develop. That turned out to be actually pretty true. And it wasn't necessarily the legacy commercial manufacturers who did this. It was new companies who were not building commercial machines and then a sort of simplified version for the home. These were new companies trying to build products solely around the idea that espresso can be incredible and you should have a tool that can allow you to get there if you've got the budget. Looking back, I think it's fair to say that that segment of the market may always have been there. It was just deeply underserved because it was underestimated in terms of its size and its passion. Now, I can show you this idea a different kind of way. If you go back 10, 15 years and look at coffee shops, they would use the commercial machine that they chose as a kind of signal to their customers. If they had a big Slayer or Black Eagle or a big La Marzocco on the bar, they were signaling to consumers, we are at the cutting edge, we are really serious about our coffee. You see this machine, you know that we care, you should come and drink our coffee because it's going to be really good. Right? Like there was a little bit of a kind of arms race of coffee technology for a while as people just threw money at this problem to sort of showcase and signal that they were the hot new thing. It's changed in a fascinating way. Now I realize if you go out into the world and look at the sort of cutting edge, most experimental, kind of bleeding edge cafes, you know they're that way because they've got domestic equipment on their bar. They've got a single dose grinder that might be $3,000 or $4,000, which was really ultimately built for the home. It wasn't built with the coffee shop in mind. They might have something like a decent espresso machine on the bar for pulling unusual shots because it lets them do things that are different to commercial machines. People are using domestic equipment to signal the seriousness of their approach to coffee. And I think that is completely fascinating. It kind of means the power has shifted. All of this sort of innovation is really focused on the home because people at home have no pressure in the same way that a coffee shop does. You can take your time to pull a really great shot of espresso, and you can look for tools that will help you do that once or twice a day, not 500 to 600 times a day. This is where the power shift has happened, because if you look at the most interesting stuff going on in coffee right now, and that might be stuff like spraying coffee beans, the Ross droplet technique as it's known, or it might be needle distribution tools, right? Like they are used at home really commonly because they're very effective. You don't see them in cafes very much, even though there are kind of cafe options. This is a needle distribution tool designed for cafes, but you don't see it in many cafes. But the ones that you see it in, again, are signaling we take our coffee as seriously as someone who's really into it at home. This is not me talking negatively about cafes, by the way. I should be very clear. Cafes are under huge pressure just to be financially sustainable. You have ever-increasing rents right now. You've got labor costs are going up. Cost of goods is going up. Coffee in particular, we're staring down the barrel of a very significant increase in the price of coffee. Their priority is going to be stuff like creating great coffee as part of a great experience, but it has to be something scalable to being offered hundreds and hundreds of times a day. Domestic equipment, as good as it is not built for that task. It's built for something else. But as part of that offering, some of them may want to offer a kind of high-end domestic experience almost, and that's why they're picking that kind of equipment. I want to talk about this because it sort of implies that for a little while, innovations come from the home, and I think it has, and will continue to come from the home for a little while, from that community who are very invested in pushing at the sort of forefront of coffee making. And whether it's going to be stuff like step-down baskets, or it's going to be, other sort of new burr geometries or approaches to grinding, or whatever it's going to be, I don't think it's going to come from the coffee industry, from coffee shops. I think the most interesting stuff in the next few years will continue to come from the home. I should acknowledge I might have a little bit of a bias here. Go back in time, I was deeply in the world of coffee shops and sort of the coffee industry, right? Like I was working on commercial espresso machines, and that was part of my job, as well as a coffee roasting company that was supplying coffee shops. That was entirely my world. And then the work that I do here, making videos, has pulled me into a different world. But I'm aware of my bias, and yet I still don't see a strong counter argument to the idea that the power and innovation has fundamentally shifted. Now, I have to say, doing what I do here on YouTube, this whole thing makes me very happy. I love that there is a community here who is interested in sharing what they've learned, what they know, what they're experimenting with for the kind of greater good. That often doesn't happen quite the same way in an industry that is competitive. Here, no one's competing with each other in terms of their coffee in the morning in two different houses. Everyone just wants to drink better coffee. Everyone is open to sharing their ideas, their experiments, their innovations. And that makes me very, very happy. And along those lines, now I'd really love to hear from you down in the comments below. Like, how do you feel about this idea? Is this something you've thought about or experienced or talked about? What do you think will be the sort of point of focus within the community going forwards to improve all of our coffee experiences? At some point, I might have to address the fact in a video that coffee is going to get more expensive, and I think that's going to sharpen our minds again a little bit more. And again, the industry as a whole may benefit from the innovations of people at home. But this just seemed like a really interesting topic that I wanted to talk about and share with you. So I will say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.